Right, folks, thanks for coming. We're getting started. My name is Rob. I organize Idea to IPO. We've been doing events in Silicon Valley for many years. We hold events multiple times a week from San Jose to San Francisco. In fact, most of our events are down in Silicon Valley, but we're going to be doing more events in San Francisco because we know there are many entrepreneurs and movers and shakers up in San Francisco. However, people that live in San Francisco usually don't leave San Francisco. So who here lives in San Francisco? Great. Do you guys ever leave San Francisco? Okay. Anyway, so to accommodate San Franciscans, we're going to be holding more events in locations like this to be geographically desirable to you. Is this location geographically desirable to those of you that live in San Francisco? Okay. Well, it's a great location. It's near the Civic Center. There's landmarks like Twitter, Uber, Airbnb, the Oasis nightclub. So yeah, it's a great location. So anyway, we'll be doing more events in San Francisco and some here. So we have a busy calendar of events. I'd like to highlight two events that are coming up. Next Wednesday, March the 8th, or rather March 14th rather, Data Science 101, that's going to be at Google in San Francisco at Spirit Street. Thursday the 15th, we have a discussion on Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and ICOs, a legal perspective. That's going to be down in Palo Alto at InnoSpring. So check out the details for those events and all of our events on our website, ideatoipo.com. We launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members and no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 60,000 members among all our meetup groups in the Bay Area, and we've completed over 1,859 events. We're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley, bar none. Is that it? Is that all I get? Anyway, well, let me expand on that for a second here for you San Franciscans. So if we're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley, which includes San Francisco, and Silicon Valley is the global center of entrepreneurship and innovation, that would make us the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the world. Still a little weak, but that's okay, I'll take it. Our mission is to promote entrepreneurship, support entrepreneurs, build community, and provide value in the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. So to that end, we provide content that is practical, actionable, and relevant, stuff that you can actually use to succeed as entrepreneurs. And we believe in building community because Silicon Valley attracts people from all over the world who come here to do great things. Who here is not originally from Silicon Valley or San Francisco? Wow. So who here was born and raised in the Bay Area? Well, who here was born and raised in San Francisco? Wow, we got two native San Franciscans. Well, let's hear it for those two guys. You guys are a rarity. Yeah. Whether you were born and raised here or just arrived last night, it is important for us to provide multiple channels for you to meet people, build relationships, and grow your network. In addition to our content-oriented events throughout the week, we have social events on Friday nights. Every few weeks, we have a TGIF mixer. The next one is going to be March the 16th, and that's going to be at the Hyatt Regency Santa Clara. So it's a little far for you guys in San Francisco, but feel free to check that out. With regard to value, it is important that we provide value at each and every one of our events. Not just value for your money, which is important because we know many entrepreneurs are struggling financially. So we make sure our events are affordable, and if you cannot afford the cover charge for whatever reason, come talk to me and we'll work something out. And at each and every one of our events, we provide a delicious buffet meal. Is that a delicious buffet meal? All right, 5 people think it's a delicious buffet meal. Well, it's a buffet meal. Let's leave it at that. So I want to thank our sponsor of that buffet meal, the law firm of Mintz-Levin. So let's hear it for our sponsor of that buffet meal. More importantly, though, at each and every one of our events, we want to make sure we provide value for your time, which is your most valuable resource. Anyone here getting any younger besides our moderator? So when you invest your valuable time to come to our events, we want to make sure you maximize your ROI. We have many partners that help us do what we do: law firms, venture capital firms, angel investor groups, incubators, accelerators, colleges, universities, lots of other players in Silicon Valley. Tonight, we're grateful to Parasoma for hosting us at this beautiful venue. Is this a beautiful venue? Okay. Well, they're a great partner, and we're honored and privileged to be collaborating with them, and we look forward to many, many more events here. So let's hear it for Renato and Parasoma.
Thank you all for coming. So as Rob mentioned, this is Parasoma. We're a co-working space during the day. So usually you'll see a whole bunch of ping pong tables over here. Entrepreneurs, small teams, early stage startups, working, trying to make it happen here in Silicon Valley, which is really what we're all about. The event portion is, well, you're in it right now. So we host meetups, anything along the lines of entrepreneurship, design, tech, you name it. Anything startup related, we're all about. So if you guys ever want to host an event or have any questions about events coming up, go ahead and just pull me aside and we'll have a little chat. Thanks, guys.
One of our other partners is here tonight. I would like to also have him come and say a few words. So let's hear it for Jerry and Tech Futures Group. Applause.
I'm Jerry with Tech Futures Group. We've got a table back there. Edgar's back there as well. So Tech Futures Group is a nonprofit. We provide free business advice to tech companies. Our services are free. We don't take equity, and we don't accept cash. We're funded by the Small Business Administration and also the state of California. So the way it works is you apply to Tech Futures Group. The application, of course, is free, and it's online. If we like what we see, we don't accept everyone, we'll pair you with an entrepreneur in residence, serial entrepreneur who's had a good exit or two. They provide strategic business advice. And then they will introduce you to our other advisors if you need them. Patent attorneys, someone who helps with manufacturing, someone who will build a financial model for you so you understand your business better, and also so you're prepared for pitches to angels and VCs. We help with that. And then we also help with SBIR and STTR government grants. We've been extremely successful with government grants. We get measured on three things: whether you raise money, whether you get jobs and revenue. We focus on helping you raise money. Last year, our company's raised about $40 million. Since the inception of Tech Futures Group in mid-2012, our company's raised about $150. Check it out, techfuturesgroup.org.
Though our local mission is to support entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, our global mission is to democratize entrepreneurship and innovation all around the world. So to that end, we have a robust YouTube channel, youtube.com/idea2IPO, so go check it out. We have tons of videos. We've documented and archived many, many of our events. And this rich, valuable content is available on demand, anytime, anywhere, totally free of charge, whether you're in San Francisco, Palo Alto, Maui, Moscow, or Timbuktu. And our partner in this endeavor is Tim Jeggers of Jeggers Films, one of the top professional videographers in Silicon Valley. Let's hear it for Tim.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm Tim. I've been working with Rob for a couple years. All the videos on his YouTube channel for like the last 3 were probably done by me. And other than that, I do like corporate and commercial photography, real estate stuff, weddings. I got started with quinceañeras back in high school, believe it or not, and now I'm here. And yeah, it's always fun to be out here and see all these people that are doing all these different things and hopefully doing something as awesome as whatever you guys are going to lead this discussion into. And I'm glad to be here. If you have any questions about what I do, I'll be around, and I'll go ahead and give it back to Rob. Thank you.
All right, well, here's the schedule for the rest of the evening. We're going to go right into our panel discussion. The panel will have a spirited, lively discussion, right, till about 8 o'clock. At that point, we'll open up to the audience, and we'll set up a mic stand here. So we'd like to have people line up, speak into the mic, and we'll take as many questions as possible. At 8:30, we're going to wrap up the formal program. You can talk to the panelists for a few minutes. As a courtesy to Parasoma, we'd like to leave the building by 8:45 because there's some setting up that we have to do for another event tomorrow. So keep that in mind. We'll have the panelists go outside, and you can hang out with them outside, talk to them all night on the street. Right. But in any case, so keep that in mind. So that's the timeline. So without further ado, at this point, I'm going to pass it off to our distinguished moderator. He's one of the top corporate and startup attorneys in Silicon Valley. He's a partner at the law firm of Mintz Levin, and he is passionate about helping entrepreneurs succeed. So let's give it up for Greg Chin.
Thanks, Rob, and thank you all for being here. What Rob said about me being passionate about working with startups was not just a good line. I worked at a technology startup in Japan before I went to law school and really loved it and decided to come out to Silicon Valley after law school. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I represent startups in venture financings, company formation, M&A, and IPOs, and really excited to be here. So, I speak Japanese, and happy to speak Japanese with you later, but probably not the focus of the discussion. So first, we wanted to poll the audience and figure out, what your backgrounds are. That might help the panel. So how many of you are founders of an AI startup? Wow. Extraordinary. How many of you are employees? Not founders, but an employee of an AI startup. Great. An employee of an enterprise company? Okay. Government employee? No, they're all home. Any academics? Any investors other than our panelists? Well, we got the panelists. Any other lawyers? Please leave. We're sponsoring. Please leave. I know we've got at least one journalist here. Any journalists, bloggers, writers, or PR folks? Great. Thank you for being here. Anyone with just an idea for an AI startup? Very cool. Someone who's just curious about AI in general? Cool. Okay, great. So that's very helpful. And now I'd like to hand it off to our panelists and have them introduce themselves and explain a little bit about why they're here this evening.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Ashish. I work for Grishin Robotics. We are a $100 million VC fund, primarily investing in early stage companies, writing between $2 to $10 million checks, primarily focused on investing in robotics, hardware, and a little bit on the consumer side. Yeah, there are 4 of us here. We are very excited about what's happening today over the past few years. And yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting with a lot of you folks and learning more about what you guys are working on.
Hi, my name is Faye. I'm an investor at Norwest Venture Partners. We're a $7.5 billion venture capital firm. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We also have offices in India and Israel as well. I'm part of the early stage venture team that focuses on enterprise and B2B technology investments. Besides myself, we also have a team that focuses on consumer internet, healthcare, later stage private equity, and then as well as the 2 international teams. We spend a lot of time in AI across all of our different investment teams. We actually have over 20 AI-related investments in Norwest. So we're definitely digging deep and very excited with all the trends that we're seeing.
Hi, I'm Shaheen. I'm a partner at a venture capital firm called Lux. We've been around for about 15 years, funded over 100 companies over the course of 5 funds. Our current fund is a $400 million fund. I joined about 11 years ago. Led a lot of our investments in semiconductors, rockets, satellites, driverless cars, VR, a lot of buzzwordy stuff. We do seed and Series A. We'd like to lead and partner with great founders like yourselves, and I'm here to find great founders to partner up with.
My name is Prashant. I am at a firm called Crunch Fund. We're a seed fund, and We have about 180 active portfolio companies, manage about $100 million, so we're writing smaller checks, mostly pre-seed, seed, a little bit of Series A. We invest in just about everything. I spend most of my time on consumer and frontier tech, but also do some enterprise, so I guess I basically do everything too. Does only one mic work?
Oh, actually, I think we're supposed to, yeah.
Okay, we're a group-oriented panel here, so we're sharing the mics. In any event, we'd really like the discussion tonight to be free-flowing and conversational rather than having each one of us answer a particular question. I'll start off with a question, maybe pose it to one of the folks, and please feel free to interrupt one another and dive in, and we'll move the discussion along that way. So I'm going to start out, and Faye, you're tagged with this because we started off the discussion about the questions tonight first. So can you give the group, your thoughts about the distinction between AI, machine learning, deep learning, some of the buzzwords that are being thrown about, and explain also, why this is a particularly hot area at this time.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of buzzwords that get thrown around interchangeably in this space. So I'll kind of give my 30-second high-level view, and happy to hear the panelists jump in as well. So at the highest level, you have AI, which, if you really want to define it very broadly, is basically machines doing tasks that humans would consider to be intelligent. Closer. Does this work? So at a very high level. Does this work? Okay. At a very high level, when we think of AI, it's basically machines doing tasks that humans would consider to be intelligent. And then when you go one level deeper, there's different techniques inside of AI. Machine learning is one. Deep learning is one as well. So machine learning is when we think about training. We think about training our models with massive amounts of data sets for the models and the AI to get inferences from the data. Deep learning was a breakthrough, a recent breakthrough in this space, which is actually allowing the machines to come up with even more. It's a new type of architecture that allows the machines to come up with even more inferences on their own. Computer vision is another technique inside of AI. So there's many different techniques inside of the broader bubble of AI. The second point I'll just make is, why is this relevant now? These are not necessarily new concepts, but in recent years, what we've seen is just a dramatic decrease in the cost of infrastructure, both on the speed and GPUs that are being used to train the data as well. So now what in the past was pretty infeasible has now been democratized. Anyone have anything to add?
Hard to top that.
Well, is there, from our panelists, is there any particular technological element that you're interested in, or could companies that you're interested in come from any one of those subsectors?
I've been looking at a lot of companies that are involve applications of computer vision. So there have been very, very big and meaningful breakthroughs in computer vision recently, which made it possible to do things that just were impossible before, although I guess you could probably generalize that statement to a lot of applications of deep learning, largely driven by also just infrastructure for deep learning has gotten a lot better, and you have a lot more data. You can use the data and pipe it efficiently.
So broadly speaking, I'd like you guys to jump in about the kinds of AI startups that are being funded generally across the industry, and then to Prashant's last point about computer vision, what are the sorts of AI startups that your fund in particular, or you as an individual, are particularly passionate about?
So I think AI in itself is like not solving a problem, right? I mean, AI is just a tool. I mean, it's kind of like, hey, I'm building a C++ company, or I'm building a Java company. That's not exactly a company as such. You're just using it as a tool to solve a problem. I think the fundamental notion of like, what problem are you solving? What are you doing? Which is, are you building a scalable business? I think those fundamental questions still exist, right? I mean, the thing is, like, what you can do now with AI has basically improve the dimensions of what people can do. Like, for example, self-driving would not have been possible many, many years ago, just because, I mean, the amount of data that you need to process within the car itself is crazy. And when you, so for those type of particular applications, I think AI is just being applied in that particular thing. From what we have seen so far, I mean, the larger companies are focused primarily on the horizontal AI, where they are trying to basically build more horizontal tools. Like, for example, Google, Amazon, they are trying to go after solving voice, or like Android Now, or Alexa, or Siri are some of those examples. The way startups are trying to go after, that at least we find more interesting, is like where they are trying to go deep and have, first of all, either a proprietary data set. The value of the data increases as they have more and more data coming in. So it needs to have some type of network effects, because otherwise, if you don't have network effects, then anybody can come in, and then you're not able to basically build a moat to kind of like scale your company. The third one is kind of like, the data in itself is meaningless. You have to take the data and generate some insights. And by taking those insights, you have to kind of like make some type of recommendation that has an impact on the person, on the enterprise who's going to use that product. Either it's going to be on reducing your cost, increasing efficiency, or some other type of benefit in terms of increasing your revenue. So like, if you want to take, and a lot of these companies exist in specific verticals. Like, one of the verticals is kind of like on the agricultural tech, where people are looking at a lot more types of data sets, which is like imagery data sets coming from drones, from satellites, from manned aircrafts, and they are able to more frequently do surveys of the crops, and able to identify, do the weed detection, and are able to eliminate and control those weeds before it kind of like spread. So that has a direct impact on increasing the yield for the farmer. So as a company, I mean, you're applying those data sets, but you have to think about computer vision, you have to think about and understand and verticalize that solution to build a company in that space.
I think that was a, someone else would go? Yeah, I mean, I think that was a really great overview. We think about it very similarly. I would say, in particular, the way we've been thinking about AI recently is that almost every company that we're seeing has some aspect of AI, and it's really about, it's a building block to solving a business problem and building a scalable business.
So the last part of the question was specifically your fund and you as an individual, you know, are there particular categories within the sector generally that you're passionate about? Prashant, you mentioned computer vision earlier. Shaheen?
I've upset the god of microphones. So, you know, we as a firm don't necessarily pursue, you know, areas, you know, disciplines for the sake of, you know, pursuing those disciplines. I think, you know, our approach is more identifying founders who really understand a pain point, a problem, and are finding the best tools out there. It may be AI, it may not be AI. We're just hearing about AI a lot more often now. To solve those problems and have a solid thesis as to how those solutions underpin a valuable business. So I think pretty much every business, whether large or small, should be exploring AI to improve their customer acquisition costs, the lifetime value of their products, or customers, just the general metrics of their business. And if you think about AI today, it's similar to, you know, the internet, you know, 15 years ago. It's similar to, you know, computing and PCs before that. You know, my expectation is that it's going to penetrate everything. So my preference is to look past the veneer of AI and focus on the fundamentals of the business. And the fundamentals of the business may not even really need AI to be interesting. It may only be improved by AI. And the natural expectation, the assumption going in, should be that all of your competitors will likely have access to the same technology, because there's really nothing about AI that's particularly proprietary, except perhaps access to data. But I think the expectation should be that eventually, over time, that competitive advantage will eventually erode as well. So to give you a specific answer, we've invested in autonomous cars, and autonomous cars are enabled by AI. I've funded a company that's using AI to automate post-production. So with computer vision and AI, you can automate a lot of the manual tasks that go into visual effects in post-production, like rotoscoping and matting and 2D, 3D tracking. That's all really, manual today. So, we were less interested in the application of the technology to visual effects and more excited by the founder's vision as to how they can build a very compelling business in an otherwise very boring and unattractive industry by leveraging AI. So how does AI make you special? Would be, or how does AI make you advantaged? And the answer maybe not really. But again, the goal is to fund an interesting business more so than to fund AI.
Or a particular category or, yeah.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And I can probably add a little, because I'd forgotten what the question was actually now that it was clarified. So I think for me, I spend more time on consumer than enterprise. When I think about consumer applications of AI, okay, what goes to mind? So Amazon maybe predictions on your phone. Basically, most of the consumer applications of AI today that are not computer vision related are things that are either trying to annoy you, harass you, or take your money. I would love to see more applications of AI in the social space, for example, right? I think there's some really creative and interesting things that you can do. I backed a company called Molly. They're currently in Y Combinator, and I actually invested in them a while ago. But they essentially use chat interfaces and data that comes from other social networks and sit between all of those social networks to connect people in unique ways. They've been iterating a lot, so you should try the product and you'll see what it is and experience it much better than I can possibly explain it up here. But I find that space very interesting. We've also done autonomous vehicles. We've also done a lot of things related to computer vision. We've also done things related to drones. I talk a lot about ambient computing and also something called serendipitous computing, which I can maybe elaborate on later. So
Why
there's a lot
don't
in
you
AI.
do that right now?
Okay, so ambient computing is this idea that the data from IoT devices allows the devices around you to sort of do things on your behalf, or allows your environment to be responsive to you. For example, if you walk into your room and there are sensors, your living room, there are sensors that know that you're there and turn on your lights and set the temperature to the correct temperature. You could consider that a version of ambient computing. Also, if that same set of sensors knows that you're leaving your home and going to work, it could perhaps call an Uber for you. Serendipitous computing is computing in which devices can actually interact with you. So I think that is the next generation of computing devices. When I say interact, I mean specifically communicate. So the minimum there is the communication is complete, meaning that the devices can interact with you in a way where they can communicate any idea. So that could be through usually human language, either through audio or visual text. Also has to be direct and instantaneous, so it's not something on your phone. That wouldn't be really serendipitous computing. Your phones can already communicate anything to you, but you need to initiate those interactions. And then the last criterion, which is hard to achieve, is persistence. Persistence just means it happens all the time. And I think a lot of this is still constrained by device categories. Intel's font glasses are pretty interesting. If they created a laser scanning display that, in theory, if what they have built gets to market, you could wear those all day and you'd almost have like a little head-up display in your life. Apple is clearly angling towards this with the AirPods. I had backed a company called Doppler Labs, which failed at some point last year. They were also working towards this sort of serendipitous computing audio future. And Google is also working on the Pixel Buds and whatnot. Again, the idea today is that these are headphones and they have cool features like translation. You can interact with them a little bit. But these tech companies are thinking at some point they will have a channel directly into your brain. So that's where we're going.
I think it's just worth noting, just really quickly, that we are past from a technology lifecycle perspective, we are past the point where an asset would be valued in of itself. So if you look at, for example, Ring, which was acquired by Amazon for a little over $1 billion, that was not driven by their ability to process images to see if, whether or not it's your mailman or if it's a plant moving to notify the homeowner. It was because of the business that they had built and the penetration that they had in the market. And so if you look at kind of technology trends, there are big acquisitions when a technology is novel and big companies want to get access to those assets. But then over time, that technology becomes commonplace and commoditized. So Google, Nest can very well just replicate that capability in-house. So it would be less motivated to buy Ring, for example, in 2018. Now, if that capability was available in 2012 or 11, then there may have been more motivation to acquire because of that functionality or capability. And so, but now I feel like as if value is really derived by, going back to my previous comments about the nature of the business. So for those of you who are thinking about, oh, we can use AI to do this, we can use AI to do that, just showing cool things probably doesn't generate as much value as it probably would have, again, when this technology was less mature. And the expectation should be that big companies would rather just build it in-house at this point versus buy a company just for an asset. And the preference should be more on the business at this point of the technology life cycle.
Just to add to that, kind of like the way we look at kind of on the consumer side or on the robotics side is, as you think about it, kind of like on the consumer side, the focus is primarily on like where do a consumer is spending most of his time. So if you think about 24 hours in your day and how you kind of like think about that, of course, we are sleeping for like 8 to 9 hours or 6 hours, depending on whom you're asking. But then for the rest of the time, either you're working, you're driving, you are cleaning up, you are eating, you're cooking food. So those type of different things. And people have started taking some of those things. And as you start thinking about, like previously, the AI was basically as you start constraining the environment, and as you can like start thinking about the simplicity of the task that needs to be done, where the machine does not need to think as much. Like those were the tasks that were automated first. Like so, for example, like cleaning at home was one of the first examples, like where companies like Roomba kind of came out many years ago, and they were one of the first companies to kind of like build a public company out of that, because nobody wants to kind of like keep cleaning and vacuuming on that side. But now as there is a lot more processing that can happen at the edge, and you can kind of like start capturing a lot more data, you can start seeing a lot more, the people start trying to solve a lot more complex problems. So like self-driving cars trying to solve the problem of like our transportation. We have seen a whole bunch of other stuff, kind of people call it food tech, where either on the front end, where somebody's trying to basically use automated deliveries or combination of like using robots/automation to build pizzas. We're an investor in a company called Zoom Pizza, where they are trying to do a lot of innovation around that angle. Similar to that, on the other side, on the back end, there's a serious labor shortage. So if you think about like if you run a pizza restaurant, if you go to a pizza company and say like, hey, how many laborers do you have on an average? So they can say that, they would say we have anywhere from 2 to 5 people. So why you are asking like, why do you have so many people? Because the demand actually comes in during dinner time between 8 to 10 when they will have 5 people on board. Otherwise, normally during the daytime, they have 2 people. So now if you're able to build some like a collaborative robot that can basically take care of that demand peak and peak curve, that can solve the problem of labor shortage, and it would directly have an impact on these restaurants, because these are like very small margin businesses, and anything that you can save them would have a huge impact. So you start seeing a lot of those type of innovation. Other big area is warehouse automation, where as e-commerce is kind of like taking a lot of shape. There was a company called Kiva Robots that Amazon acquired many years ago, and because of that, Amazon now is pushing pretty much every single e-commerce retailer, as well as traditional retailer like Walmart, and they are trying to basically use their power to kind of like not only create better margins on the warehouse side, because they've automated a whole bunch of tasks, but also trying to kind of like automate like faster delivery and have created a faster consumer convenience, like, hey, I expect everything to be delivered to me within 2 hours. Now, all of these retailers have to kind of like start figuring out how to compete with Amazon, because if they don't, then either they will, like, people will forget about them and they will lose business, or either they will have to work with startups who are trying to solve that problems. So there are like many verticals where if you start looking at like bigger trends, as Shaheen mentioned, like what these companies are doing, you can still see and find pockets of opportunity where you can go in and try to apply these applications, but fundamentally you still have to solve a problem because a technology in itself like is not going to solve a problem.
Okay. So, the discussion started on the consumer end, and Ashish, you kind of moved it a little bit towards the enterprise end. I know, Faye, that you and your team are particularly interested in enterprise investments as opposed to consumer. Can you talk about the distinction, what you see as why you're particularly focused on enterprise versus consumer, and where some of the exciting opportunities are?
Yeah, and so just to clarify, I mean, as a firm, we do also do consumer investments. It's just for me and my team, we spend all of our time on the enterprise side. I mean, there's been a lot of really interesting themes that have been touched on so far. We actually also made a warehouse robotics investment last year in a company called 6 River, which was the ex-Kiva team. So robotics is an area where we have also spent a lot of time. On the enterprise side, we see a lot of really interesting applications of AI. The broad theme that we see a lot of is really just augmenting the employee and augmenting the worker. So for example, one company that I'm closely involved with is it's called Bluecore. So it's a company in the marketing automation space. And what they're doing is they're an intelligent decisioning platform that helps marketers decide what to send to who and when, so at a very highly personalized level in a very automated fashion. Another kind of in this broad theme, another interesting company that we have invested in is called Gong. And what they do, it's a tool for salespeople who spend a lot of time on the phone. Gong uses speech recognition and natural language understanding to transcribe the voice sales call. And then also they layer in coaching. So maybe in real time, the salesperson is talking too slow, or they can say tips of, hey, if the customer brings up this, you should focus on this. So ways to augment the employee and make everyone many, many times more efficient than they would be on their own. So that's a theme that we're pretty interested in as well.
That's great. Shaheen, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think my microphone's running out of batteries. Sorry. So, yeah. Anyway, so I love circumstances where founders come to me with something that I haven't heard of. So ideally, I would like a founder to come to me and say, listen, like we've dissected this industry and we've found a major inefficiency here. And we think that by overcoming this inefficiency with this technology, it could be AI, it could be something else, then we can build a remarkable business. The biggest oversight that I see amazing technical founders make is that they don't fully appreciate the portion that they are solving for or that they are improving using technology, namely AI, as it relates to the broader, let's say, cost that their customer is incurring. So if applying AI takes a 5% cost center down to a 2% cost center, then I would question whether or not the customer would be interested in adopting AI or automation in the first place. One great example is retail. So in retail, the cost associated, for example, with inventory related to with respect to every other cost that a retailer has to go through or incur is a relatively small portion of their business. And this business is already a very low margin business. So it's very difficult for those customers to take a risk on new technology. And if they ever want to pay for anything, there has to be very, very hard evidence as to how it can improve their bottom line. So it's very easy, especially for a roboticist or a technologist, to get enamored by their solution, but it needs to be taken into consideration within the context of all of the customer's costs and how much of an impact it would have on their basic economics.
Great, thank you. We could continue exactly on this vein for a long time, but given the time constraints, so I think everyone here is excited about the opportunities that AI provides, and in sophisticated ways, as Shaheen is talking about. Don't just think about the technology, think about the business. But lots of folks out in other parts of the country are more concerned about the potential impact that AI may have upon the economy, upon the labor force. You know, Prashant, can you start us off with, you know, your thoughts about the risks here, the extent to which you're concerned about them?
AI killing jobs. There's reporters in the audience.
Yeah.
Clearly, yes. Yeah, it's interesting, right? As technology evolves, we are able to automate tasks that, clearly we are automating tasks that humans currently do. Computers, that's been happening for a long time. It started happening when we had mills and could, you know, replace weavers' jobs with big, giant mills in the 1800s. Obviously, we've come much, much, much further. You know, I don't know what the bounds are of AI. I don't know if we're obviously very far from an artificial general intelligence that could actually do everything that a human can do. And there's still a lot of things that are remarkably difficult for computers to do. But it's probably fair to assume in the near term that, you know, a lot of jobs are just going to become unnecessary, right? You know, radiology is a field where it seems like today already AI is just better than radiologists. I think for structural reasons within that field, it's probably going to be a very long time before radiologists don't have a job. And there's probably going to be a very long intermediate phase where the AI is just a tool that people use. And I think a lot of people sitting on panels use that as a sort of cop-out to say, like, yeah, no, the AI is not going to replace your job. It's just going to help you for a really long time. Just don't worry, it's going to be fine. And, you know, maybe over that individual's lifetime, that may be true in some cases. You know, certainly in fields where people get, you know, paid a lot of money. But I think in places where people are more sensitive to costs, it's clear that people are going to lose jobs. I think it's important to spend time thinking about education and retraining, but there is also a very real risk, if not likelihood, that the rate of technological development this time will finally rapidly outpace the rate at which it is possible or feasible to retrain people for jobs. And so if anyone has a good solution, let me know.
I think you said it, it's education.
Yeah, I think education and retraining, and just I think as humans, we need to be good to each other. We should start from that principle.
One thing,
That'll solve many of the world's problems. Topic of another conversation.
one, to piggyback off what you're saying, one thing that's interesting about, you know, because the one side of the argument is that at every, you know, technological change, like even in the Industrial Revolution, textile workers were protesting that, you know, everyone's going to lose their jobs. What are we going to do? But this time around, so many different industries are being disrupted all at once by technology that the rate of change and just the breadth of the change is kind of staggering when we think about it. You know, so many different verticals that we've all just talked about in the past few minutes are all at risk for significant disruption. So I do think key is, you know, going to be significant retraining and significant investment in helping people adjust to the new, because there will be new jobs get created, but making sure that the people who lost their jobs will be able to take on the new ones.
Yeah, I mean, so I normally take I agree with everything that's been said. I take two approaches to this question. I take a macro approach and the micro approach. And we've kind of talked about the micro. From a macro level, if you look at societies that have adopted technologies versus those who haven't, those who have adopted automation, like most of the developed world, have lower unemployment. And those who have not adopted automation typically have higher unemployment. So that's just a general macro theme. From the micro perspective, yes, there are technologies that have, over the years, displaced human jobs. So whether it was at the mill, but even if you move to more technical roles, like I'm an electrical engineer by training, and there was an entire discipline around designing filters, which are basically used to clean up the signals that go into your phones so that when we make a phone call, it doesn't interfere with his phone call, for example. And that was an entire profession that was annihilated by MATLAB, which is a software tool. But the thing is that those engineers, to Prashant's earlier points, were easily retrained and repositioned to do other interesting things. And so my expectation is that over time, jobs will mature and change, and I think the onus is on our educational system to keep us abreast of those new skills that we need to progress as technology progresses. To Faye's point on Six River, So Six River is not replacing employees in order fulfillment centers. It is making employees in order fulfillment centers more productive. So a fulfillment center doesn't need as many employees as it otherwise would need to have a certain amount of throughput. But guess what? Like with its existing employees, it can have a lot more throughput. And more throughput means better economics for customers. And history, like over and over again, shows that whenever costs go down for consumers, demand goes up disproportionately, whether it was cars or refrigerators or TVs or transistors, whatever it was, we've had disproportionately more demand as cost has come down, and that has led to an overall increase in jobs. And so I don't know about others here, but at least Faye has voted with her dollars in not investing in direct human replacement. We're not interested in investing in companies that are directly replacing workers, and I'm sure a lot of the customers that you guys work with don't want to replace their workers because their workers do a lot of things for them. And AI typically does a finite number of things. We don't have that general intelligence just yet, which is why I'm optimistic, and I think that it was probably a topic of another panel, but our educational system, like it is like right now in healthcare, since it's regulated, our doctors need to continuously be retrained to remain certified. I think that should apply to all professions so that we all are at the top of our game as technology progresses.
I think, so I agree to pretty much everything that everybody discussed. I think I would like to answer the other side of the thing, like what are the ethical problems with AI? I mean, there are a lot of unsolved ethical problems of AI because first of all, I mean, whatever people understand the inputs and outputs, but people don't understand what's happening inside these deep learning systems at the moment. So I think that's a big thing because I think when you think about kind of a 2 by 2 metrics, which is one is number of decisions being made per second and the cost of that decision being made. I mean, the first things that got automated is on the ad tech side. On the ad tech side, people are making millions of decisions per second because as millions of people are on Facebook, they are trying to kind of go and Facebook has to show them ads. What is the cost of showing somebody a wrong ad? Very minimal. But on the other side, if you think about if a self-driving car has to make a decision of whether if there are 2 people and the self-driving car has to decide whom to hit or whom to save, that's a very significant problem that needs to be solved, and that is not yet solved. And there are these are the ethical problems that people are trying to figure out, and I think those are the unsolved questions that we have to kind of as a society or somebody has to come up and kind of figure out who makes these decisions. Other big example or area that people generally don't want to discuss is the use of AI by judges to kind of in our legal system to basically decide the bail system for the people who have been kind of whom they're deciding whether to give them bail or not. And it's a lot of people don't understand, but I mean, but judges across the U.S. are currently using those systems to decide what type of punishment to give to a particular person, depending on their demographics and stuff like that. And I think ProPublica has kind of come out and talked about how these systems are also racist because the data set that is being fed into the training data set that is being given is inherently biased in some way because as humans, all of us are biased for the lack of better term. But from that perspective, we have to kind of figure out how to kind of use a neutral data set for training because AI is only going to use that as a reference because we don't have general intelligence, so we have to figure out how to eliminate these biases. And as long as these biases will remain in the data set, it would impact any type of AI being used in any type of system.
So as a lawyer, this is an area I would love to jump into. I think it's really interesting, the fact that when you have a system coming up with a decision based upon a data set where you can't explain to the person, with respect to whom the decision has been made, exactly why the decision has been made. There's no process or way to write it out in a way to explain it to them in words analytically. It's the system came up with that. That is incredibly interesting. And I also just want to add, on the radiology front, that's something that hits really close to home. My mother worked for 40 years in the radiology field as a technician in a hospital, working with radiation oncologists, and but yet I'm working. The next deal that I'm really excited about is a deal where I'm going to be representing a big corporate investor in a radiology company where they, in the immediate future, they're going to the system will be the second reviewer for the radiologist. But both the company and the investor hope in some time period to replace, to be the first reviewer and not just the backup. But in any event, I'll cut myself off there. And given our limited time, can you give Prashant, some predictions about how this year is going to play out? And, this week there was a big deal where a company called Kensho was acquired by S&P, a great data point of exits for the space. How things are going to play out over the next 6 months, year, and then maybe 5 years and 10 years?
Oh gosh, if anyone has an immediate reaction to that, I feel like I need to think about this one a little bit.
I mean, it's a good example of the benefit of getting engaged. I'm not using my mic again here, so I'm gonna get yelled at again. Maybe I should just put this down and not get distracted by it anymore.
Brilliant
Yeah,
comments, but issues with the mic.
Yeah, seriously. Well, not very brilliant, but I think it shows the benefit of engagement with your customers. So I believe that S&P was an early customer. They had an engagement. I think they made an investment and later decided to buy the company. So I think it's beneficial for the audience to not be allergic to working with big customers or taking money from big customers early on, and not to just embrace it for the sake of embracing it, but really the devil is in the details. This is an example of where an early, intimate customer relationship led to a great outcome for everybody around the table. And there are many examples, I'm sure you as a lawyer see many of them, horror stories that result from corporations. So it's good to have relationships with strategics early on. So it's good to find a great lawyer, and it really comes down, the devil is really in the details as it relates to those kinds of things.
Just another comment on that deal. One thing that was interesting to me is that when we think about acquirers of AI and machine learning companies, the first wave was kind of Facebook and Google and Apple and all the big tech companies that was really, a talent war. I mean, they were just trying to acquire, raw, talented teams. And now we're seeing, you don't think of S&P as an AI company or even really a leading edge tech company. Don't quote me on that to the reporters. But it's all companies now are really thinking about AI. And there was an interesting study or an interesting survey I saw. Like 85% of Fortune 500 CEOs think that AI is extremely important to them. In the next year. So all companies are thinking about AI right now.
Any other predictions?
Yeah, okay, so first prediction. So I mentioned Intel's Vaughn, some of these smart glasses-like things, the sort of serendipitous computing devices. So I think you're going to have a display-based device that's either in the form of eyewear or maybe even contact lenses that becomes a mainstream consumer device category. Probably not in the next year, but probably in the next 5 years. I think in the next year, voice interfaces, so Alexa, Home, Cortana are going to get a lot better. We're seeing adoption of those increase quite a bit. And ha 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 ha. Yes, the creepy laugh of Alexa that I'm sure many of you have read about.
Anyone, by the way?
It actually did happen to me. Yeah. It was really weird. My ex-girlfriend was visiting me. It was the first time I'd seen her in probably like 5 years. We were just catching up. And we were sitting there in my living room, and this creepy laugh started happening. And I'm like, what is going on? And I realized it was Alexa. It was weird. So yes, it actually did happen to me. I thought it was just me, but apparently not. So that'll be interesting. I think you're going to see a lot of acquisitions in the consumer area. I think you're going to see a lot of really, really, really big bets coming from the big technology companies. We are, mobile devices are pretty mature at this point. Cloud is pretty mature at this point. I think we are waiting for the next big device category. Also, I think in the next 10 years, we're going to have pretty good EMG and EEG input systems for computers, meaning things that can read, sensors that can determine what your muscle inputs will be and what things you're going to control, and frankly, things that can borderline read your mind. I think neural implants themselves are probably still 20 plus years away, at least ones that people will actually have, but I think you're going to actually, I have seen things that make me believe very strongly that very lightweight and small devices will be able to you'll be able to use those to just like think like a keyboard. Like if instead of having to type on a phone, I think within 10 years, I'm extremely confident that you'll be able to wear something that is like a baseball hat and actually like send messages to people. So that's pretty crazy.
I think from my perspective, I think building a consumer hardware device is going to become even harder and harder because on one side you have companies like Apple, Google, Amazon kind of like coming up and pretty much trying to kind of like own everything in the home, starting from your front door to like everything in the kitchen to everything in your home theater systems and stuff like that. And then we're going to start seeing like a lot more Chinese version kind of like also starting coming over here where the cost is going to be extremely low for all of these devices. And you're going to start having a lot more smart devices and a lot more consumer homes going forward. Another thing is kind of like the fundamental business models are changing in terms of like the asset ownership that we have. So like how we people can like think about owning homes versus owning cars. Like for example, because if it's kind of like, I think in 5 to 10 years, you'll start seeing at least certain places where those are restricted to kind of like have only self-driving fleets of cars being operated in those areas just from the efficiency purposes because they want to kind of like understand how these cars will operate and you will start seeing more and more of those things. I think there will be new categories of personal transportation devices that will be created, whether those are kind of drones. Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like either it's flying cars or drones or like yeah, whatever. So something of that sort of thing is going to happen. It's going to make. I think we're going to also see like people kind of like start focusing a little bit more on health. You already start seeing kind of like the category of like smart devices on that side started with Peloton, but you start seeing more and more of those type of devices coming to the market. I think on the enterprise side, you will start seeing where people are focused, specifically on the healthcare side. I think there are big, large problems that needs to be solved because of the current inefficiencies in the current healthcare system. And specifically for like elder care and senior care and people who suffer from chronic diseases, there are a lot of these problems where people are trying to build like these type of robots technologies to solve the problem of loneliness, to make sure that people are taking drugs. I mean, in this case, kind of people are taking medicines at the right time. It's like those kind of like sounds like smaller problems, but those are massive problems that cost billions of dollars to the taxpayers on that side. So I think those are some of the things that we think about.
Fei Xin?
Not to disrespect any of my fellow panelists, but you guys hear me? Yeah. Am I jinxing the microphones here? But if you're a founder and you're looking to an investor to inspire you with an idea, then you probably shouldn't be a founder, in my opinion. If we had any prediction of the real predictions of the future, and had any insight, and really were excited about something that doesn't exist, like we would be in the audience right now. We wouldn't be wasting our time sitting on this panel.
It's hard to go after that response. Look, I think the best part about this job is we get inspired by people like you every single day. We hear crazy ideas every single day and keep them coming.
On that note, I think we're very close to our time for questions. We've got a great audience, and I'd like to invite folks to come up and ask questions.
First of all, let's give it up for our panel. All right, so we'd like to take as many questions as possible. So here's a drill. If you have a question, come right up here to this mic stand and ask away, and we want to do this as efficiently as possible.
Sure. Yeah, we've got 3.5 million truck drivers in the U.S. workforce. And one of the low-hanging fruits right now is autonomous trucks that will take over a lot of that work. What are we going to do in terms of re-educating truck drivers, and what are the jobs that we're going to propose to be re-educated for?
You want to take it first?
So actually, I think when we look closer to this problem, yes, I mean, I think the problem is not there is still a shortage of truck drivers, and the long haul truck drivers, actually nobody wants to spend days kind of like away from their home, and people want to basically spend nights at their own home. So I think the first problem that we saw that people are trying to solve is kind of like a remote truck drivers from that perspective, like where you have automated truck drivers on highways, but then the largest problem that they face is when you're trying to get on the ramp to get on the highway or get off the highway to solve the first and last mile problem. So we actually just invested in a company called Starsky Robotics that is actually solving that problem, where they are not trying to replace drivers as such, but solve the problem of shortage of these truck drivers that currently exist in the US. I think, if I remember, there is more than a shortage of roughly around 100,000 truck drivers that are less based on the demand that currently exists in the market.
What
So
about the ones
I
that
do
get
see
displaced?
jobs. Yeah, so the question is, eventually over time, as truck drivers become automated, what happens to those jobs? It's my expectation that for the foreseeable future, you're going to have some level of oversight over these trucks. Now, today, that oversight is in the form of a driver in the cabin. It's my expectation that that oversight will just move from the cabin to some central location, and those drivers will be retrained, re-educated, or trained to be able to operate trucks remotely, oversee trucks remotely, and rather than, for example, operating one truck at any given time, they will operate multiple trucks at any given time. And as a result of the economics of trucking improving, there's going to be more demand for long-haul transport. Thereby, there will be a net increase in jobs for operators of these vehicles. That, and separately, I think the problem associated with the last mile transport and maneuvering into a dock, I think, is a problem that's going to take many years to solve over just driving on a highway. So I would expect many of those drivers who choose not to do the teleoperation stuff to be solving that last mile problem or last inch problem, which is very hard.
So you'll have
as well.
pilot drivers who coach the truck into the narrow loading dock like we do with ships.
So I would expect, yeah, so I'd expect those drivers, rather than spending 5 hours behind the wheel, to spend their time spent, 20 minutes or, whatever, 10 minutes from the off-ramp into the dock and out of the dock, and also migrating to central locations where they're going to be overseeing the vehicles going on the long haul.
Hi. I have a lot of questions regarding computer vision and all those things, but you can come and talk to us. We have a demo there. So my question is kind of a little bit different. I can call this the AI investor paradox. And the reason I say that is, suppose I come to you and I have created this engine which basically does your job as an investor. Would you fund me because it's going to get you fired later?
So I think that investing is a mixture of an art and a science. I think that you can have all of the data, which the AI could make a great decision based off the data, but sometimes the best investments, it's something that no one would have predicted. So I would be very skeptical, and maybe this is self-serving, but I'd be very, very skeptical that AI could become a great investor, at least on the early stage side.
I would definitely invest, because it's going to be the last investment that I ever make.
I wouldn't invest. I would buy it so that I don't have to work anymore. I would buy it, let it do my job, and I would take a vacation for the rest of my life.
So there is actually a couple of VC funds who actually have an AI on their panel. I think there's one in Hong Kong where they've tried to kind of like do that, but I think the jury's out there, like how well they are going to perform on that side. But I think I agree. I mean, if somebody's able to do that, I mean, why are you going to come and talk to us? You're going to go and invest your own capital, right? I mean, and that's what these hedge funds do, right? I mean, because they have come up with their own algorithms. And if you look at like some of these hedge funds, they are so secretive about their algorithms and the way they kind of like look at the data and make bets by looking at all of these random data sets that nobody else can make out of like what to do with it. But that's what they're doing, and they've kind of like grown it over the past 10, 15, 20 years to like billions of dollars under management. If you look at like the Bridgewaters of the world and many others that have existed for a while.
But public market investing is so different than
So, I mean, like, they,
There's so much more data, so much more of an efficient market.
but I think looking at those kind of larger problems, they know exactly where the opportunities are from that perspective. So that definitely helps them in terms of looking at where to invest. But I agree, I mean,
Well, it goes back to that microeconomic problem and thermodynamics and stuff like that. So anyway, I'll pass the mic to somebody else.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you for the panel. My name is Emna. I'm the founder and CEO of Vimly, where we automatically prioritize and label inbound support messages. So I have two questions, one AI related and one just investor related. So about the AI part, I just said what my product does, and you mentioned the word AI because I don't believe we're an AI company, yet by a lot of standards, we are because we're building a contextualization engine. But the way I look at it, it's like when the internet boomed, right? So when Amazon came out, malls started putting websites up and saying we're internet companies. It's kind of the trend we're seeing too. Like some companies will have some machine learning and deep learning and call themselves AI. So in your opinion, right, like where do we put the word AI, right? Like if a company comes to you to pitch you guys, like I don't consider myself an AI company, yet I'm building the technology behind. So what's your opinion about that? The second question that I have, which has nothing to do with it, I've heard this in the Valley. I just closed a round, and people told me, Emna, you're not a Silicon Valley team. I'm originally from Tunisia, and I'm not an ex-Harvard, an ex-Facebook, an ex-Google, but I have a lot to show with my team, and I think we have a very strong, solid team. So yet I know for a fact some VCs don't look even at some decks when they don't see those. So I want to also hear your opinion about that. Thank you.
So I think you're reinforcing Faye's view that it's very difficult to replace a VC with AI because yes, there are some VCs that invest based on where the founders go to school. Are there these buzzwords in the deck? Is there Google, Tesla, Facebook, Twitter experience in the backgrounds, and they use that as a basis for making an investment decision. So if you're going out for those kinds of investors, which are typically extremely early stage investors because there really isn't much for them to be able to make a decision based off of, then by all means, you want to do kind of search engine optimization, I guess, for your deck and for your bios. But when you're talking to more sophisticated later stage investors, we typically tend to look beyond the veneer and try to identify the metrics that are associated with the business and try to understand, A, do we like those metrics? Are we comfortable with those metrics? And B, will the capital that you're seeking inflect those metrics in a way where you can have a huge inflection in the company's valuation? So in this explanation that I just gave you, there is no mention of where you're from or where you went to school or where you have your job experience from. There is no mention of what's underlying your technology, what kind of buzzwordy technology are you using. It's very, very basic.
Yes, that's for later stage. Sorry, not to answer back, but
Yeah.
for later stage, it makes sense. You're gonna look at ARR, MRR, and things like that. But I'm still talking for the founders in the room who are early stage, for somebody who like me and others, which is still the case. Yet
Well, from the description that you gave, it seems like you have a real product and you're solving a
Yes.
real problem. So I wouldn't say that you don't have CAC LTV, MRR, LTV to CAC, whatever those metrics are. You don't have that, but there is still a basis for making a decision, and which is beyond just pedigree and buzzwords, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would add is almost every deck I see has AI and machine learning and buzzword of the day or blockchain or whatever, and it doesn't take too far into the conversation to figure out who has something real and who has something doesn't. I mean, we see plenty of actually sometimes I'm even more impressed when someone doesn't bother with any of the buzzwords, but you can quickly figure out that they have something real there, or we try to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it is most helpful to me when all buzzwords are removed and someone just tells me what they are doing in the plainest language possible. From that, I can evaluate it. But there are actually pitches where I get confused because people are trying so hard to make it sound impressive by adding words that are maybe somewhat relevant, but are usually irrelevant and don't tell me anything about what the company actually does.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you all.
All right, next question.
Hi, my name is Nicolas. AI means data. Usually when you have a B2C company, you're having and gathering a lot of data. To make money, you need to have a service. Sometimes it's better to do B2B instead of B2C to monetize the service. My question is, are you seeing and are you investing in companies doing B2C but having a business model more on the B2B side?
Potentially, I think if you have proof points that the B2B business model works, then I think that could be compelling. Without more detail, I think it's hard to answer with much more detail. I would say in general, there was a time period where people would argue that their data, they would sell their data, that they would have some way of engaging with customers, and they would get this magical data and they would somehow monetize it, and it was very like hand wavy, like yeah, and then money, like data, then money. And I think in practice that just usually doesn't happen. Usually there's very, very little money in data. There are some exceptions to that. And sometimes there's a lot of money in data, but I think it depends on the case, and you need to have some early proof points around it if it's something that's new.
Like one of the examples is kind of like if you are an e-commerce company and there's a huge problem of returns, if you are a company that's coming in and going to help, you are a consumer-focused company, you are collecting data from them and help them figure out so that they only buy products that they need, and then that has an impact on the company because then on the B2B side, you are helping me save money from returns, like because I'm not getting returns back. So I think thinking of those type of models where basically even though you're serving my customer and by doing that you are having some type of impact on the B2B side, I think that's more attractive instead of just kind of like selling data and analytics. Like, I mean, it's very difficult to make money just by selling analytics tools. Like, look, I mean, and there are like so many other examples of that, as Prashant mentioned.
Do you have companies in your portfolio doing that, having a B2C app, for example, and monetizing on the B2B side?
Nothing that I
think, yeah. So, okay. No.
No, nothing I can think of this time. But I mean, for example, I mean, I can think of companies like that, right? I mean, there are companies in that space. Battery Ventures have a company in their portfolio, and I saw a couple of other companies in this particular example, which they are doing exactly that, right? I mean, so there are these type of companies that have been funded by other VC funds, and if you talk to me, I can give you more examples. There are definitely a lot more examples that exist. If you look at fundamentally trying to understand, they're serving a customer, but they are doing like any type of like fraud companies, right? If you look at anybody who's basically working on e-commerce website and trying to reduce fraud, right? So they are B2B2C companies on that side where they are serving the customer because they're trying to only have actual customer do the transactions, and by doing that, they are reducing the fraud for the e-commerce company. So it depends on how you explain your business, and I can give you a lot more examples on that side.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I mean, if you look at Google, Twitter, Facebook, these are B2C companies that are using the data that they generate from their communities to sell B2B, ads, right, to big businesses. And so I think it's a intellectually stimulating mental exercise to say, oh yeah, we're gonna reach all these people, get all this data, and then sell it back to these enterprises. Well, good luck pulling that off. And so the nature of the beast when you're trying to do consumer is very different from trying to be a B2B business. These are two very different companies. And again, it's extremely challenging to pull off as an early startup. And so if that's the plan you want to take, then I would focus on, okay, what is my unfair advantage that's going to get me access to this huge community? And once I get access to that, that would be like a second, I guess. Once you have that kind of engagement that gives you that kind of data, then you're already pretty far along. And then you can figure out, okay, what will I do with that, with that information or with that community? But engineering all of that up front, I think is I'm sorry, off the record, I think is a fool's errand, in my opinion, to try to like predict. And I doubt people at Google and Twitter and Facebook were saying like, yeah, we're gonna make money selling ads. I highly doubt that's what Mark was thinking in his dorm room when he was creating Facebook.
Thanks.
That was their business model. Really? Facebook, they didn't want ads. They thought for years they could get away without ads, so they tried to monetize by literally selling stickers. Like you would send a happy birthday sticker for $1. We see where that went.
Yeah, I have T-shirts if you want.
I called in 2005 that it would be ads when the people in my school started signing up on Facebook, and they said, "Oh, there are no ads," and I'm like, "There will be ads. I guarantee you." I was right.
Okay. Thanks. Very helpful. Thanks.
How you guys doing? My name is Eugene Johnson. I run a company called Zyro, which is an AI-powered chatbot that drives intelligent marketing for small businesses. So I got a two-part question. The first part is, I know a lot of investors say we don't like buzzwords. Try to keep buzzwords out. Yet when you look at investment patterns, they all invest in buzzwords every single year. So it's hard to kind of know how deep you go into the conversation versus how far, or how much you push that conversation to the side. And then the second conversation is how much, from a pitch perspective, when you're fundraising, how much do you put into the pitch of what you want to do versus what you've already done? Because this is my fourth business, so I made a lot of mistakes in the earlier businesses where we built so much, made an incredible product, and then we didn't really focus a lot on the actual business model. So this time around, we said, okay, we're not going to do a ton of engineering. We're going to engineer as much as we need today to be able to sell and grow a business. But there are a ton of things that we know we can engineer into in the future. How much of the conversation do we pitch of what we have versus what we don't have, and then how do we get around the whole thing of losing credibility if they say, well, I know you talked about this, where is that at in the system? We have it coming in a roadmap, but we don't have it currently. So I know it's a two-part question. It was a little bit deep, but.
Sure, okay, so I'll answer that I think in reverse, or do my best to. So I think first, it's important to do both. I think it's really important to get an investor excited about what your big vision is from a venture perspective. Again, we're looking for, at least for us, even from the seed stage, right? We're looking for companies, if it's enterprise, that we believe can realistically, within 5 years, get to $100 million plus in annual revenue. If it's a consumer company, we're thinking about massive engagement and usage, typically, right? So I think getting the big vision of how this is not only a good business, but a big business, a venture scale business across pretty early in your pitch is important. I think from there, then you talk about what you have already done, and part of what an investor's assessment is going to be, what have you done and how much time, how effective have you been at that? You don't necessarily need to have done everything yet, but it's important that you have a clear vision and that the investor believes that you are able to and can execute on that plan. So I think talking about what you've already done gives an investor a good signal of, if in 3 months you were able to spin up this system and it's a really good MVP and it works, like that can be a pretty strong signal. When you talk about your team and when you talk about your plans and your next milestones, engineering milestones and business milestones, the way in which you convey those goes a very long way in making investor, come to that assessment of, okay, not only do I like this vision, but I believe that they can do it. But it is important to what you said to get that vision across initially, because even if someone thinks you can do what you say you're going to do, if they're not excited about it, it really doesn't matter. So I think the first thing to do is get someone excited about the vision.
Yeah, that was a really great response. The only couple of things I would add to it is VCs tend to have really short attention spans. So you really, so exactly. You really want to get people super excited in the first couple minutes. Get them like, this is going to be a huge company. You're going to change the world. And then be balanced about what you've done. And what's on your roadmap. And then the third piece, which you didn't touch on too, is what validation have you done with your potential customers? So in your case, if you're selling to SMBs, tell us about the 10, 20 SMBs that you've gone out and talked to, and they've gotten really excited, and they've said, hey, if you build these other 10 features, we're also going to be on board. So that would be, I'll say, the third piece of bridging what you have versus what's in your roadmap.
Next question.
Thank you. I'm a founder of a startup. I'm now coming from an AI background. So as Shahin said, I found some problems in the recruiting industry, which I have passion for. I'm a developer background, but just to be able to understand the industry, I became a recruiter 5 years ago. Just tried 6 months. It's a hard job. But I'm not developing any solutions for the employers or recruiting side. I'm actually more helping on the candidate side. So it's more like a virtual personal assistant tool to help candidates to find their job easier. So my question is, we got a small fund of like 100K, not a big thing, but just enough to deliver my MVP with offshore team, etc. So my next thing is $1 million within maybe five or 6 months later. I'm gonna be maybe knocking your doors. So my question is, how many you would think number of candidates that I would gain to be able to kind of attract your $1 million investment? That's one question. I'm thinking maybe 100 is enough or 1,000 to be just too specific about the question. The second thing is, one of my sites says, hey, 100K is not too much. I shouldn't be worried about too much about creating that much revenue, like just to develop my product, or also show my engagement rather than scalability and engagement, not focusing on the profitability or revenue, because that's the next thing. As long as I develop something useful for the people, I believe that they're gonna pay. So that's what I'm thinking. On the other hand, it's all about the numbers. I know that you guys are gonna ask about the revenue, how much I charge, even though it's small, etc. So which one I should go through? Those are the questions. Thank you.
I'm by no stretch an expert in this business, but I think you have a fundamental problem, and that's, to your point, what investors look for, which is what drives value, is engagement and retention. And unfortunately, you only touch your customer when they're looking for a job. So the next time that customer comes back, based on the description you just gave us, is when they're out of the job, which if it's in the Bay Area, or when they're switching jobs, which in the Bay Area could be like, Silicon Valley could be like a couple of years, but in most parts of the country is even longer than that. And actually Airbnb had the same problem, because people would book a vacation home for the summer and then maybe not come back until like the winter or spring break or whatever. So it took them a very long time to measure these engagement and retention metrics to be able to capture follow-on funding. So my advice to you is, first of all, to your earlier question, yes, the metric you want to show is engagement and retention, and B, I would find a way to enhance your business model where the people that you place stay engaged with your platform, as opposed to leaving and only coming back when they're looking for their next job.
Yeah.
Just one thing I'd add. I think, well, yes, it's true. So I would disagree that it's about the numbers. I don't think it's actually about the numbers. The more revenue that you have, or any numbers that you can point at that indicate that what you're doing is working, or that it's highly profitable or lucrative, that's part of the story, and I think that can make it more compelling for investors. At the end of the day, the number itself is usually not why people make the investment. So I could not tell you it's 100 or 1,000 without having a lot more context, and even then I probably still couldn't answer the question. But I think, again, having clear proof points that what you're doing is a big pain point for people, or that it's a really good solution in the case of finding candidates, and just, again, getting people excited about the story, I think is very important at this stage.
Any clue on the number of the initial clients to be eligible that amount of money? Huh?
Founder of LinkedIn, he understands early numbers, what they mean. At least I would have no idea, because I haven't funded companies like this in the past.
Generally, the more you can get, the better, but there's no magic number.
I think one of the ways you can do it is kind of like talk to other people who have raised capital in the similar category that you are in, and try to ask them, and then you'll be surprised like how friendly entrepreneurs are when you reach out to them unofficially, kind of like, and have one-on-one conversations. People will share a lot of details with you, and I think that is generally one ballpark that can kind of help you understand where the market is, and what type of companies are getting funded, at what valuations, and I think some of that data can help you. But as kind of like Shaheen and Prashant pointed out, those are just kind of like more data points for you, but they are not going to guarantee like whether you're going to get funded or not. It's all about, at early stage, about like your vision, and a whole lot of other things that both of them pointed out.
We have time for one last question. Please make it a good one.
Okay. I think the question is a good one. I do have just one quick FYI for you on the truck thing. How you said that nobody wants to become a long-haul truck driver. My brother got a doctorate in math taught school for a year, and then tried to become a long-haul driver to get away from everybody. But I think he's an outlier, so I don't think it's going to mess up your model. My question is, of all the things that have come your way, or even just in the news about AI, AI-based technology, any specific company or device that you thought this is going to hit it out the park, and then it failed? It was a colossal failure.
I mean, like so we typically, especially me personally, I do not look at myself as a consumer of a product when I choose to make an investment, because I'm the least qualified person. I want to be the least qualified person in the room to make that call. I want the founders to be able to make that case as to why this is an amazing product. And in most cases, I mean, in this business, you know, most products don't, you know, and businesses do fail. But to answer your question, it's normally, in my experience, not because of reasons that we predicted. It's because of reasons that we did not predict. And even in many cases, the founders did not predict. So I can give you an example, like, this is not AI, but like, you know, I had a company that was putting wireless radios into both ends of what would be an HDMI cable, and so you wouldn't have to have an HDMI cable connecting your TV to your set-top box. And the technology was amazing, and it makes complete sense, but it just didn't take off because the economics just didn't make sense, and people's behavior, people were already tuned to the notion of having to connect a wire between your TV and your DVD player, so the notion of something wireless was foreign and just not interesting. So, you know, there were many reasons we thought this could fail. We thought, oh, the technology may not work, the supply chain may not come together, we may not be able to bring costs down, but at the end, like, the market just didn't really care. And so, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah, it does. Anyone else?
I have thus far I was very optimistic about adaptive learning on one side and how AI could help drive better educational outcomes. As a business that hasn't done very well, I think there have been examples in which the technology has been shown to work, but not as well as I thought it would. On the consumer fintech side broadly, there were a lot of folks that believed that AI would lead to this huge revolution in, you know, coming up with new credit models and new ways of pricing things, and, you know, everybody would, you know, debt markets would become more efficient, be able to finance things more easily, you'd be able to get better prices on insurance. You could argue whether that's really AI, those are just sort of more different data models with more inputs. And virtually all of those have failed, I would say. And so far, it may get better. One thing about AI is that there are a lot of AI projects where you have to work very hard and use a lot more data to end up getting the same results as something like a 2-input model. That is particularly true with deep learning. There's some areas in which deep learning massively outperforms very, very simple models. And there's some cases in which deep learning, it takes a long time to become as good, but you've expended 1,000x the effort. So AI is not a catch-all solution to many problems, and it has, again, so far been disappointing in a lot of areas.
One of the other things I would say is, like, a lot of time we have seen is, like, kind of a really great entrepreneur is kind of like stuck in a shitty market, like where they are trying to basically, I mean, the team is amazing, they build a good product, but the market in itself is like like they've kind of like targeting such a small niche market that it becomes very difficult for them to kind of like see that unless it becomes late for them to pivot or try to expand their product portfolio. And I think that also leads to kind of like, I mean, it's not their fault, but at the same time, just because the market is too small, like, there is nobody to buy that product. And because you've raised venture capital, the expectations are so high that you're supposed to grow at like 2x, 3x, 4x year over year. And if you're not able to achieve that, then you won't be able to raise your next round of funding. And that basically means that you have to shut down your business.
Thank you.
Let's give it up for our panel. Let's hear it for our great moderator, Greg Chin. Let's hear it for Parasoma for hosting us. Let's hear it for our event team, sponsors, partners, Tech Futures Group. Let's hear it for our audience. Let's hear it for me. So the video will be on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/idea-to-IPO in a few weeks. Go check it out. Conveniently, we have food in Ziploc bags, so feel free to take some home. And as a courtesy to Parisoma, we'd like to leave the building by 8:45 p.m. so you can chat with our panel for a few minutes. Shortly, they'll be going outside. It's a beautiful night outside. They'll hang out on the sidewalk and chat with you all night. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.